The morning sun crept over Fort Benning, its light slicing through the mist that still clung stubbornly to the parade field. Dew glistened on the short-cut grass, shimmering like diamonds before boots trampled it flat. The air was thick, humid, and heavy with the mingled smells of sweat, dust, and freshly oiled rifles from drills the night before. Reveille had already blared, but the sharp notes still echoed faintly in the recruits' ears. Private Donna Keller stood near the middle of the formation, trying to blend into the sea of olive-green uniforms. She wasn't the tallest, nor the loudest, but something about her quiet presence always seemed to stand out anyway. Her dark hair was pulled tight into a regulation bun, but beads of sweat already trickled down her temples. Her heart hammered, not from the calisthenics they'd barely begun, but from the anxiety she carried into every morning. At the front of the formation, Colonel Raymond prowled like a lion in fatigues. His boots crunched against the gravel at the edges of the field, his eyes sweeping the rows with the practiced glare of a man who had commanded troops for decades. Broad-shouldered, square-jawed, and with silver streaking his cropped hair, Raymond exuded authority. His reputation was carved from 30 years of hard service. He wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. At least that's what he told himself, but he believed a soldier's worth was measured by how much pain they could endure without breaking. Excuses in his mind were weeds in a garden that needed ripping out at the root. Form up. Knees higher. Higher. His bark cracked like a whip. This isn't a damn dance class. The recruits groaned collectively, raising their knees to chest height as they jogged in place. The field shuddered under the rhythmic pounding of dozens of boots. Keller felt her breath shortening, her side tightening. Pain, sharp and unforgiving, flared beneath her ribs. She clenched her jaw, willing herself to ignore it. But the more she pushed, the deeper the pain burrowed, like a knife twisting with every step. Colonel Raymond noticed. Of course, he noticed. His gaze honed in on weakness like a hawk spotting prey. He veered from the front and marched directly toward her row. The recruit stiffened instinctively, knowing someone was about to be singled out. You! Raymond's voice cracked the morning air. His fingers stabbed in her direction. Private Keller. What's wrong with you? She froze. Eyes darted toward her from both sides. Some sympathetic, some eager for a distraction. Her throat tightened. She wanted to vanish into the dirt. I asked you a question. The colonel roared, stepping closer. Why are you dragging your sorry carcass like a sack of potatoes? Keller's lips parted, but no words came. Every explanation she might have given felt like betrayal of her secret, of the walls she'd carefully built since childhood. She swallowed hard, trying to summon anything. Sir-eyed, but the colonel cut her off with a laugh, deep and rolling, laced with derision. Don't tell me. Let me guess. He started pacing in a small circle around her, his boots deliberately crunching the gravel for effect. Blisters? A hangnail? Maybe you didn't get your beauty sleep? The formation chuckled, some nervously, some cruelly. Raymond thrived on it. He believed laughter welded units together, even if it came at one soldier's expense. Keller's fists tightened. Heat rose to her cheeks, not from exertion, but from humiliation. The pain in her side pulsed like a drumbeat, daring her to speak up, daring her to end this charade. Raymond leaned close, his breath hot in her ear. You think war waits for excuses, Private? You think the enemy cares if you've got cramps? The recruit snickered again. Keller stared straight ahead, jaw locked, but inside her mind was a battlefield of its own. Every instinct screamed to stay silent, to endure, to fade into obscurity. That had always been her survival tactic. Yet something about the colonel's sneer, the echo of laughter rolling through the formation, tore open old wounds she'd buried too deep. Raymond stepped back, folding his arms. Pathetic, he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. Soldiers don't whine. If you can't hack it, pack your bags. The sting of his words cut deep, but it wasn't new. Donna had heard variations of that line, her entire life teachers, neighbors, even family, all mistaking her quiet resilience for fragility. What none of them knew was that she had already survived what most couldn't imagine. What none of them saw was the scar she kept hidden beneath her uniform, a permanent reminder that pain was nothing new to her. She breathed heavily, staring at the dirt beneath her boots. Around her, the recruits kept jogging in place, their eyes flicking toward her like moths to a flame. She could feel the weight of their attention pressing down on her shoulders. Raymond's laughter boomed again, filling the air. "Look at this, troops. A soldier who can't even handle PT. Maybe we should all slow down to keep pace with Princess Keller." More laughter followed. Some of it hollow, forced. Some of it genuine. But all of it felt like daggers. Donna's hands trembled at her sides. Inside, the war she had fought to bury surged forward. She remembered the searing heat of that street, the explosion that ripped the air apart, the moment when childhood ended in fire and smoke. She remembered the faces of Marines pulling her from rubble, their uniforms soaked in blood, hers and others. The memory burned behind her eyes, as vivid as the scar beneath her shirt. Her breath caught, and suddenly she realized she couldn't stay silent any longer. Raymond loomed, waiting for her to crumble, to mutter some pitiful excuse he could mock into the ground. Instead, Keller's hand rose slowly, deliberately, to her jacket zipper. The recruits noticed first. A ripple of curiosity moved through the ranks. Some stilled their laughter, sensing something shifting. The colonel arched an eyebrow. "What are you doing, Private?" he demanded, his tone sharp with suspicion. Her fingers trembled on the zipper, but she pulled it downward anyway. The metal teeth rasped loudly in the quiet morning, each inch falling open like a drumbeat of defiance. Raymond's smirk faltered. She slid the jacket from her shoulders, the morning sun catching her sweat-damp shirt. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Soldiers leaned forward instinctively, eyes widening as they caught the first glimpse of something more than exhaustion, more than weakness. The colonel's laughter died in his throat. Keller exhaled, steadying herself. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The metal zipper clinked against the morning sun as Dana Keller slowly peeled her jacket from her shoulders. For a moment, it seemed as if time had stilled. The sound of boots pounding the parade field faded into the background. Even the birds seemed to pause, hovering silently in the humid Georgia air. Soldiers straightened instinctively, sensing that what was about to happen was no ordinary display of weakness or stubbornness. It was a revelation. Colonel Raymond froze mid-step. His usual confidence, the arrogance that had made him feared across multiple platoons, faltered. "What are you doing, Private?" His voice cracked in a way that made him sound older, smaller somehow. The formation had fallen silent. The few who had been laughing moments ago now shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Donna and the colonel. Her fingers clutched the zipper for a heartbeat longer before letting it slide fully down. She shrugged off the jacket, letting it fall to the damp grass with a soft thud. The sun caught her t-shirt, soaked with sweat, and for the first time, the recruits saw it. A scar. It stretched jaggedly from her rib cage down toward her hip, an angry, raised line carved into pale skin, its edges puckered and raw in places. The sight silenced the entire formation. A murmur ran through the ranks, half shock, half awe. Some soldiers looked away, unable to face what they had mocked just moments ago. Others stared, wide-eyed, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to form words, only to have them die in their throats. Raymond blinked, his stern mask cracking. The smirk that had haunted Donna's mornings disappeared entirely. He took a step back. "What happened?" he asked, almost whispering. It wasn't a question of curiosity or duty. It was disbelief. His voice carried the weight of decades spent enforcing discipline, and yet, in that instant, it was stripped bare. Dinah inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling with steady determination. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, not in front of a parade field, but in her mind over the years. Every soldier she had trained beside, every sarcastic comment, every eye roll at her pace, they didn't understand. They never had. And she wasn't going to let them reduce her story to an excuse. "This," she began, her voice quivering for only a second before strengthening, "isn't weakness. It's survival." The words echoed across the field, soft but impossible to ignore. The recruits froze. Even the wind seemed to still, carrying her declaration straight into every soldier's ears. Raymond's hands flexed at his sides. He had seen wounds before, scrapes, bruises, torn muscles, but nothing like this. Nothing that carried the weight of history, of trauma, of a life saved against impossible odds. She pressed a hand to her side, tracing the scar lightly, as if proving it was real. "Fallujah, 2004. I was 14. Wrong street, wrong moment. A car bomb tore through my neighborhood. I shouldn't have survived." Her voice cracked slightly, and she swallowed, refusing to let tears show. The formation remained silent. Each soldier now confronted the gravity of words they hadn't expected to hear during PT. Raymond's jaw tightened. The laughter, the mocking, the drills, it all felt suddenly small, petty. His mind raced, recalling the countless times he had drilled excuses out of soldiers, believing toughness came from enduring physical punishment. And here was Keller, a private half his age, carrying a scar that wasn't earned through discipline or training. It was a relic of real danger, real combat, real death. The recruits, meanwhile, were caught between awe and guilt. Some glanced at one another, ashamed for the jokes they had shared at her expense. Others studied her carefully, trying to understand the story written on her skin. What had seemed like weakness now screamed strength, louder than any drill instructor could command. Raymond's voice was low, almost restrained. You've been carrying this all this time, under your sleeves?" Dinah met his eyes squarely. "Yes, sir. I wore long sleeves every day, hid my pain, kept my distance. I didn't want anyone to see that part of me. I thought it would make me different." Her hands lowered to her sides, trembling slightly. "But hiding it doesn't make it disappear. I learned that long ago. Surviving doesn't mean living if you hide from life itself." The colonel ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. He had trained hundreds of recruits, commanded men through grueling exercises, and faced real combat in his early years. But he had never faced someone whose life story defied his sense of logic, whose resilience didn't fit neatly into his categories of discipline and obedience. Dinah Keller did not just survive. She had endured the unimaginable, and she was standing here, calm, steady, alive. One of the younger recruits, a private barely 19, whispered, I didn't know." His voice trailed off. Another muttered under his breath, "No one survives that at 14. The murmurs rippled quietly across the ranks, a stark contrast to the laughter that had filled the air moments ago. Dinah nodded slightly at them, acknowledging the recognition without arrogance. "I didn't survive for attention," she said, her voice firm. "I survived because I had to, because someone needed me to, because I wanted to be here, standing on this field, earning my place, not hiding behind an excuse, not running from what I've endured." Raymond took a step closer, studying her carefully. "Private," he said, his tone measured. "You've carried more than any soldier I've commanded. And yet you still step onto this field, still train, still push forward." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, his tone lacked mockery. It carried something heavier: respect, acknowledgement, perhaps even a flicker of humility. Dana exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. She knew the field would never look the same. The soldiers who had mocked her would not see excuses anymore. They would see survival, and a quiet, unrelenting strength. Raymond, for all his years, would not easily forget this morning. "Dismissed," Raymond said finally, his voice stronger now, though still tinged with astonishment. The recruits moved, some hesitantly, some in stunned silence. They carried new awareness, a quiet reverence for the private who had revealed herself in the harshest environment of all a battlefield, expectation, pride, and ridicule. Dana bent to retrieve her jacket, draping it over her shoulders with slow deliberation. The scar beneath would remain unseen again, but the impression it left on every soldier present was indelible. She adjusted her posture and walked back toward the formation, her steps steady, her heart racing not from fear, but from victory. Victory over judgment. Victory over past pain. Victory over the belief that her story could ever be diminished by ignorance. Colonel Raymond watched her go, silent, contemplative. For decades, he had drilled discipline into soldiers. He had mocked weakness and enforced resilience. But today, a private had reminded him that true strength was not built on physical endurance alone. It was built on survival, truth, and courage. Dana Keller, with a scar that told more than words ever could, had just rewritten the lesson for every soldier standing on that field. The parade field felt different now, though the sun still rose high over Fort Benning. Its warmth touched the soldiers' backs, but it no longer carried the familiar rhythm of discipline and forced obedience. Instead, it was heavy with silence, punctuated by the occasional rustle of grass under boots and the faint murmur of whispers. Every pair of eyes seemed drawn to Dana Keller, even if they dared not look directly at her. Colonel Raymond remained near the edge of the formation, hands clasped behind his back, eyes narrowing as he watched her move. His mind, trained for decades to assess strength and weakness with precision, now wrestled with uncertainty. For all his experience, he had never faced a recruit who had endured something so profound, so outside the realm of military conditioning, yet remained calm, composed, and steady. He had mocked her just minutes ago, laughed at what he thought was a flimsy excuse. Now, the image of her jagged scar burned in his mind, as if etched there with fire. Raymond's pride, the very pride that had defined him as a soldier and a commander, felt shaken. How could he have been so blind? How had he dismissed someone who had already fought battles far beyond the reach of any training drill? Dana, meanwhile, kept her gaze forward. She had pulled the jacket back over her shoulders, hiding the scar once more, but the effect of her revelation lingered in the eyes of every recruit. They weren't staring at a private struggling with PT anymore. They were staring at a survivor. Some of the younger soldiers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how petty their laughter had been. Others, older or seasoned, exchanged glances that said nothing but communicated a silent respect. One private, a lanky boy barely out of high school, whispered, "I can't believe she made it through that." "And she's still here," his companion nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah, and we were mocking her for cramps?" Dana caught the murmurs from the corner of her eye, but she didn't respond. She had learned long ago that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, silently, through action and presence. And now, in this moment, it had been earned. Raymond's boots crunched against the gravel as he began pacing slowly, methodically. His voice was low, almost to himself. Strength, discipline, endurance. And yet, here stands a private who survived more than any of them or me could imagine. He stopped abruptly, glancing at the formation. How do you measure that? How do you rate courage that has already faced death? The thought unsettled him. All his life, he had relied on strict metrics, push-ups, run times, drill performance. He had believed discipline was the ultimate test of a soldier. And yet, here was Keller, her life marked by trauma, bearing it openly and commanding respect without a single word of aggression. The recruits began a slow shuffle back to their routines, but the field felt hollow. Laughter was gone. Orders carried weight, but they lacked the sharpness of ridicule or fear. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. The presence of one private, scarred and resilient, had changed the entire dynamic. Dana took her place again in the formation. She exhaled slowly, letting her shoulders relax just enough to feel the sun on her back. Her body ached not from the exercises, but from the tension of the morning. Every muscle was taut with years of habit, holding herself in, hiding her history, suppressing the scars of survival. Now, she was learning that the real struggle wasn't physical. It was the courage to reveal her story to those who had no concept of it. Raymond's eyes followed her. He realized, for the first time, that leadership was more than barking orders or breaking soldiers into compliance. Leadership required perception, understanding, and humility. Today, Donna Keller had demonstrated a type of courage that his decades of training could not produce on command. "Colonel?" A voice called hesitantly from the ranks, a sergeant who had served under Raymond for years. He was older, graying, but sharp-eyed. "What do we do now?" Raymond exhaled, running a hand across his face. The lines there deepened as he considered the question. "We continue," he said finally, "but differently. Today is a reminder. We do not measure strength solely by drills, nor by the ease with which someone performs physical tasks. Strength also comes from surviving, enduring, and confronting what would break most men or women." The sergeant nodded, understanding dawning on him. Around the formation, soldiers straightened, a subtle shift in posture, signaling that the hierarchy of respect had just changed. Dana began jogging in place again, slower this time, measured. Her breaths were even, her movements controlled. It wasn't about keeping pace, it was about setting a standard that transcended the usual measures of performance. She ran not to impress, but because she could, because surviving meant continuing forward even when pain and doubt threatened to stop you. Raymond watched her carefully, noting the determination in her stride. It was almost hypnotic calm, steady, unyielding. He had trained countless soldiers to push through pain, yet he found himself learning from this private. In that moment, the irony struck him. The person he had underestimated was teaching him more about courage, leadership, and resilience than any lecture or manual ever could. He remembered his own scars, the ones hidden beneath medals and stiff uniforms. They were different, earned in conventional combat, but they carried memories, mistakes, and regrets. He had believed that physical toughness equaled courage. Dana's revelation shattered that assumption. Courage, he realized, sometimes came in silence and endurance, in the quiet defiance of a private standing tall, despite what life had thrown at her. The field was alive with subtle shifts. Whispers moved through the ranks. Admiration, disbelief, newfound respect. Even the soldiers who had mocked her moments earlier now avoided eye contact, not out of shame, but out of acknowledgement that they had witnessed something rare. Donna slowed her pace, pulling herself to a stop at the edge of the formation. She turned her head briefly, catching Raymond's gaze. In that look, there was no defiance, no challenge. There was only acknowledgement. She had survived. She had endured. And she had won respect, silently and without fanfare. The colonel exhaled, a long, low sound, almost like a release. He had been trained to command, to intimidate, to enforce obedience. But here, on this humid Fort Benning morning, he was confronted with the limitations of authority. Respect could not be commanded through ridicule or punishment. It had to be earned through courage, truth, and resilience. Dana Keller had done all three. The recruits moved, slowly dispersing for the next exercise, but the energy of the morning lingered. There was a new awareness among them, a quiet understanding that survival, endurance, and courage were not always measured by physical feats alone. Sometimes the greatest strength was revealed in scars, both seen and unseen, and in the courage to expose them. Raymond remained where he was, hands clasped behind his back. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in reflection. He had faced insurgents, ambushes, and chaos in his decades of service. Yet he had never truly understood the weight of survival until now. Dana bent down to retrieve a fallen water bottle, her movements deliberate and calm. She adjusted her uniform, checked her laces, and lifted her chin. She was still the private who had struggled through morning PT, but she was also something more. A survivor, a soldier defined not by drills or ridicule, but by courage that could not be measured in push-ups or laps around a field. The field was silent for a moment, except for the distant whistle of a drill instructor elsewhere. Soldiers moved past her with new glances, quieter, respectful. Dana knew that for some, the lesson of the morning would fade. For others, it would last a lifetime. And for Colonel Raymond, it was a lesson he would not forget. Authority did not equal respect, and strength could manifest in ways far beyond his comprehension. As the formation dispersed fully, Dana lingered for a moment, feeling the humid Georgia air on her skin, the grass damp beneath her boots. She was tired, sore, and still haunted by memories of the past, yet she also felt a rare sense of triumph. She had faced ridicule, judgment, and misunderstanding, and come through it intact, scarred but unbroken. The colonel's voice finally broke the silence. "Private Keller," he said, low and deliberate, carrying across the field. "Carry on." Dana straightened fully, a small nod acknowledging the command. But in that nod was more than obedience. It was the quiet assertion that she had earned her place, not by words, not by pleading, but by enduring the unimaginable. The scar under her shirt, hidden once more, carried a story that would define not just her, but every soldier who had witnessed it. And in that moment, on the sunlit parade field, everything had changed. The morning sun climbed higher over Fort Benning, casting long golden streaks across the training grounds. The air was still thick with humidity, but it no longer carried the usual tension of routine drills. Instead, a quiet energy lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary had occurred. Dana Keller's revelation had shifted the entire atmosphere. Every soldier who had laughed, everyone who had doubted, now moved with caution, respect, or perhaps guilt. Colonel Raymond sat in his office, the morning's events replaying relentlessly in his mind. He had been a leader for decades, yet he felt unmoored. Every lesson he had drilled into his troops, discipline, toughness, endurance, suddenly seemed incomplete. The old framework no longer applied. He could still issue orders, still demand obedience, but could he command respect in the same way? Not without recognizing courage that could not be measured by push-ups or timed runs. He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, eyes staring at the wall of medals and commendations that had defined his career. They felt heavier now, less significant. He thought of every recruit he had disciplined, every soldier he had mocked for perceived weakness. Could it be that he had misunderstood strength all along? Could it be that the private he had ridiculed carried a strength far greater than his own? Meanwhile, on the parade field, Dana moved among her fellow recruits, her steps measured, her breathing steady. She adjusted her uniform silently, aware of the lingering gazes from soldiers who had previously ignored her or mocked her efforts. Their whispers were quiet now, hesitant, laden with a new awareness. "Did you see that scar?" One muttered. "She survived that?" said another. They weren't making fun anymore. They were reckoning with reality. Dana ignored them, focusing instead on her movements, her rhythm. Every step, every breath, every muscle engaged was a subtle reminder. She had endured far more than anyone could imagine, and she was still standing. This was not a performance. It was a declaration. She didn't need validation, but the acknowledgement from those around her added weight to her sense of purpose. Across the field, Colonel Raymond observed silently. His eyes followed her carefully, noting the subtle way she carried herself. Even without the scar visible, the story it told was unmistakable. Discipline, obedience, and toughness had always been his measures of soldiering, but here was a lesson he had never considered. Resilience, the kind that survived trauma, outlasted ridicule, and commanded respect without shouting. He called in his sergeant, a veteran of his command with graying temples and sharp eyes. "You saw that, right?" Raymond's voice was low, controlled, but with an edge of wonder. "That private, Keller. What do we do with someone like that?" The sergeant hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, we follow protocol, but she's proven herself in ways we can't measure with drills or laps. She's earned respect just by standing there." Raymond nodded slowly. "Earned respect. Yes, that's the lesson." He rose from his chair and walked to the window overlooking the parade field. Soldiers moved, adjusting their positions, performing exercises with new awareness. Some glanced toward Dana with a mix of admiration and unease, unsure how to reconcile her quiet strength with the rigorous standards they had been drilled to uphold. Dana continued her exercises, controlled and deliberate. She pushed herself, not to compete with anyone, but to prove something to herself. Every strained breath, every aching muscle, reminded her that survival wasn't static. It demanded endurance, even after the body had healed, even after the mind had quieted the trauma. She wasn't seeking praise, but the subtle nods from fellow soldiers confirmed that her story had shifted something in them. A young private approached her cautiously, speaking in a low voice. "Private Keller, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I shouldn't have laughed." Dinah looked at him, eyes calm, measuring his sincerity. "Thank you," she said simply. "That matters more than you know." Word spread quietly among the ranks. Soldiers who had initially mocked her began to approach, asking questions, offering quiet acknowledgments. Dana answered briefly, without embellishment, letting her presence speak louder than words. Her calm, steady demeanor became a new kind of leadership, one built not on authority, but on example. Colonel Raymond continued to observe, silently taking notes in his mind. Leadership, he realized, was more than commanding drills or enforcing rules. It was understanding the invisible battles that soldiers carried, recognizing courage that could not be measured in standard tests. Dana Keller had shown him that the most powerful soldiers were not always the ones who moved the fastest or lifted the most. They were those who endured, who survived, and who could still stand with dignity when confronted with judgment. As the morning wore on, the training intensified, yet the tone had shifted. Soldiers moved with purpose, but without the previous sharpness of mockery. Every command carried weight, but it was now tempered with awareness. The field was no longer just a place to test physical endurance. It had become a place where character and courage were recognized, silently, but profoundly. Dana completed her exercises and walked to the edge of the field, catching her breath. She looked toward the colonel, who met her gaze for a long moment. There were no words, no reprimands, only acknowledgement. In that moment, a subtle shift occurred. The private and the colonel had crossed an invisible boundary. Respect had been earned, not demanded. Raymond finally spoke, his voice measured and deliberate. "Private Keller," he said, carrying across the field. You've shown strength that none of us can fully measure. Not with drills, not with words. You've reminded me that true courage is invisible until it's revealed, and when it is, it changes everything. Dana nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without fanfare. She had not sought recognition. She had only acted as herself, honest, resilient, unyielding. Yet the effect of her presence and her story rippled through the ranks. Soldiers who had once doubted her now reconsidered their own standards, their assumptions about strength and courage. The sergeant approached Raymond quietly. "Sir, I think she's changed the entire formation today. Not just the recruits, but you too." Raymond exhaled, leaning against the rail overlooking the field. "Yes," he said softly, almost to himself. "Yes, she has." The soldiers continued their exercises, but the energy on the field had transformed. Laughter, once casual and cruel, had been replaced with quiet focus. Commands were sharper, but tempered with understanding. Respect, hard-earned and unspoken, now guided every interaction. Dana finished her routine, standing tall, chest rising and falling evenly. The scar under her shirt remained hidden, but its presence lingered in the minds of all who had seen her courage. She had endured ridicule, confronted judgment, and emerged unbroken. More than that, she had taught her peers and her commanding officer a lesson in strength, resilience, and the power of revealing one's truth. Colonel Raymond watched her walk from the field, quiet for the first time that morning. He realized he had underestimated the weight of survival, the resilience of a human spirit forged in fire and tragedy. Leadership, he reflected, was not about punishment alone. It was about recognizing the invisible battles, respecting courage, and allowing those who had endured to teach others the meaning of true strength. Dana passed the formation, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Soldiers stepped aside silently, their glances respectful, some even inspired. She had not demanded it, nor had she sought it. But through quiet endurance and the courage to reveal herself, she had earned a place not just in the ranks, but in the memory of everyone present. The morning sun now stood high, blazing over the field. Fort Benning had witnessed a subtle revolution, not of orders or drills, but of awareness. Dana Keller, scarred but unbowed, had changed the dynamics of the platoon, the perception of her fellow soldiers, and the very understanding of leadership itself. And in that moment, the colonel knew that the lessons of the morning would not fade. They would stay, etched in memory, teaching everyone present that strength comes in many forms, visible, invisible, and sometimes, painfully, in scars carried silently beneath the surface. The sun climbed higher over Fort Benning, baking the parade field under its relentless heat. Sweat ran down foreheads, but the energy on the field was different now, charged not with mockery or fear, but with quiet, cautious respect. Dana Keller moved with deliberate focus, her every step measured and purposeful. She had completed the morning drills, yet she lingered, allowing the other recruits to observe her calm endurance. Every motion spoke volumes. The scar she hid beneath her uniform told a story no one could dismiss, and her presence commanded acknowledgement without a single word of defiance. Colonel Raymond stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching her closely. For decades, he had believed he knew how to lead, how to inspire, and how to discipline. He had relied on authority, fear, and rigorous enforcement to command respect. But Dana Keller had shown him that those methods could only teach obedience, not admiration, not recognition of true courage. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his graying hair. She had revealed strength he hadn't anticipated, a resilience beyond physical endurance, forged in pain and survival. The other soldiers began to sense it too. They had witnessed the moment the scar was revealed, and the story that accompanied it, and it had left a mark deeper than any drill, any punishment, any lecture. Whispers spread like ripples across the ranks, soft and uncertain. "She's incredible," one murmured. "I can't believe she survived that," another said. Some avoided her gaze, unsure how to reconcile their previous judgments with the reality of her courage. Dana, for her part, remained composed. She did not bask in the attention, did not offer explanations beyond what had already been shared. She had endured enough scrutiny to know that the quieter her response, the more powerful the impact. Her actions, not her words, were her argument. Every controlled breath, every steady step reinforced the lesson. Survival and resilience could not be measured by simple metrics, and courage often came quietly. Raymond finally spoke, his voice low but carrying across the field. "Private Keller," he said, catching her attention. She straightened, hands resting on her hips, and nodded slightly. "You've set an example today, one that none of us can ignore. Strength is not always what we measure with drills or cadences. Sometimes it's something deeper, something we don't see until it stares us in the face." Dinah's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. She said nothing, but the acknowledgement in her gaze was clear. She understood the colonel's words, not as praise, but as recognition that she had shifted the battlefield of perception itself. Across the formation, recruits began adjusting their behavior. Those who had laughed, who had whispered cruel jokes under their breath, now moved with a cautious respect. They began to mimic Donna's focus, even if subconsciously. Running drills were no longer exercises in competition or ridicule. They became moments of reflection, observation, and subtle learning. Donna's presence had created a ripple effect, and every step she took reinforced it. The sergeant who had observed the morning events approached Raymond quietly. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "the troops. They're different now. It's subtle, but they're paying attention in a way they weren't before. Even the older recruits, they're listening. They respect her." Raymond nodded slowly, exhaling. "Yes," he said, almost to himself. "Yes, they do." He turned his gaze back to Dana, who now jogged lightly in place, eyes forward, her movements steady. Her stamina was impressive, but it was her quiet control that captivated him. For decades, he had measured toughness with push-ups, run times, and drills, but Dana's strength wasn't quantifiable. It was something deeper, something he had only now begun to understand. Donna finished her light jog and slowed, allowing the younger soldiers to catch up. One approached cautiously, a private who had earlier made a snide comment about her pace. His shoulders were tense, eyes downcast. "Private Keller," he muttered, voice barely audible. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't understand." Donna looked at him, calm and steady. "Thank you," she said simply. That was all. No lecture, no condemnation, no patronizing words. Just acknowledgement. That small interaction carried more weight than any verbal reprimand. It reinforced the lesson that had spread across the formation. True respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned, quietly and consistently. Raymond observed silently, his mind turning over decades of experience. He had been proud of his ability to mold soldiers, to enforce discipline and endurance, but he now realized that authority alone did not cultivate respect. Leadership required perception, empathy, and understanding. He had relied too heavily on fear and rigor, overlooking the power of resilience that was not immediately visible. Dana moved to the edge of the field, pausing to adjust her laces and survey the formation. The sun had climbed high, and sweat dripped down her neck, soaking her uniform. Yet she carried herself with poise, her movements deliberate, her presence commanding even in silence. She was a paradox, quiet yet commanding, small in stature, yet immense in influence. Every soldier who looked at her now understood something fundamental about courage. It was not always loud, never always visible, but undeniable when revealed. Raymond approached her slowly, stepping onto the field. The other soldiers instinctively gave them space. He stopped a few feet away, standing with his hands clasped behind his back. "Private Keller," he said, his voice steady, "today you've reminded me what leadership really is. It's not just rules, orders, or punishment. It's recognition. It's understanding. It's seeing the courage that's invisible until it can't be ignored." Dana met his gaze. She had heard praise before, but this was different. It wasn't flattery. It was acknowledgement from someone who had spent a lifetime defining strength in narrow terms, and was now forced to confront a broader, more profound truth. Around the field, the soldiers adjusted instinctively, some straightening, some lowering their heads in subtle deference. The ripple effect of Dana's presence and story had reached every corner of the formation. Those who had mocked her now understood that endurance and courage could not always be measured in minutes or meters, but through the stories carried silently beneath the surface. Dana took a deep breath, letting the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. She didn't need the recognition, but she understood the significance. For the first time, she was not just surviving. She was influencing, teaching by example, embodying a lesson that could not be ignored. Every step, every motion, every measured breath communicated to the formation a truth that would linger far longer than morning PT. The sergeant approached Raymond once more, his voice low and respectful. "Sir, if we continue like this, the platoon will change. Not just in performance, but in mindset. They'll see courage differently, and they'll see leadership differently." Raymond exhaled, nodding slowly. "Yes," he said, almost to himself. "That's exactly right." He glanced toward Dana, who now stood at the edge of the field, adjusting her uniform and scanning the formation with quiet authority. She had changed the energy of the entire morning, and he realized the impact would last far longer than any drill or lecture he had ever delivered. The day's exercises continued, but the tone had irrevocably shifted. Soldiers moved with focus and awareness, no longer motivated by fear of ridicule, but by recognition of resilience and quiet leadership. Dana's presence had transformed the dynamic, creating a subtle but profound lesson that would echo throughout the platoon long after the sun had set. By the end of the morning, Dana stood alone at the edge of the field, sweat-soaked and exhausted, yet steady. Her heart pounded not from physical exertion, but from the knowledge that she had influenced the perception of every soldier present. She had faced judgment, revealed her truth, and emerged not just unbroken, but commanding respect and admiration in a way that no drill or push-up could ever achieve. Colonel Raymond lingered a moment longer, watching her. He realized he had underestimated the depth of resilience, the quiet power of survival, and the enduring impact of courage revealed in full view. Leadership, he understood now, was as much about observing and recognizing as it was about enforcing. Dana Keller had taught him a lesson he would carry for the rest of his career. Strength was not always measured by the body, but by the spirit and the courage to reveal it when it mattered most. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, the parade field of Fort Benning had been forever altered, not by orders, not by discipline, but by the courage of one private who refused to hide. The sun was high, scorching the parade field of Fort Benning, yet the air buzzed with a different energy than usual. The drills continued, but the rhythm had changed. Soldiers moved with awareness, watching one another, learning not just how to execute commands, but how to perceive courage and resilience in subtle ways. The morning's revelation that Private Dana Keller had survived trauma few could imagine still hung heavily in the air. Dana jogged lightly across the field, sweat soaking her uniform, muscles burning with exertion. But she wasn't racing anyone. She was moving at her own pace, controlled, steady, showing the younger soldiers what endurance really looked like. Every measured step, every exhalation was a lesson without words, a display of resilience that spoke louder than any drill instructor could command. She had felt the weight of their eyes this morning, a silent acknowledgement that she was no longer just another recruit. Some soldiers avoided her gaze, unsure how to reconcile their previous mockery with the undeniable reality of her courage. Others, more confident or perhaps inspired, began observing her quietly, trying to emulate the calm strength she exuded. Dana ignored the stares. She had survived far worse than scrutiny. Today was about quiet influence, not attention. Colonel Raymond watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, chewing over the morning's events. He had spent decades enforcing discipline, believing that toughness could be measured in push-ups, run times, and obedience. Yet Donna Keller had demonstrated something his drills could never teach: enduring strength, courage revealed in quiet, unflinching truth. He exhaled slowly, realizing the depth of his misunderstanding. Authority alone did not cultivate respect, resilience did. Raymond signaled the sergeant to bring him a group of recruits for a briefing. Today would be different. No yelling, no mockery, no drills designed to break them physically or mentally. Instead, he wanted to reshape understanding, subtly, guided by the example Dana had set. The recruits assembled near the edge of the field, standing at attention. Their eyes darted toward Dana, who stood nearby, still adjusting her uniform. Even without visible scars, the story she carried radiated through her posture, her movements, her presence. Raymond cleared his throat, his voice steady but low. Today, we're not just focusing on physical performance, he began, scanning the formation. We're focusing on what it means to endure, to survive, and to carry strength quietly. Private Keller has shown us something most of you will never forget. True courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's carried in silence, in scars we can't see. A ripple of murmurs moved through the soldiers. Some shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their previous judgments. Others straightened, trying to internalize the lesson. Dinah nodded subtly, letting the colonel's words reinforce the message without claiming credit herself. Her strength was not for show, it was for living, for enduring, for teaching by example. After the briefing, Raymond stepped aside to observe Dana interact with the recruits. Younger soldiers approached her tentatively, unsure if they were allowed to speak. "Private Keller," one began hesitantly, "could you show me how you maintain your pace? How you stay steady?" Donna smiled faintly, a calm, reassuring expression. "It's not about speed," she said quietly. "It's about consistency, about controlling your breath, focusing your mind, and pushing through pain without letting it control you." She motioned to a nearby patch of grass, demonstrating light jogging and breathing techniques. The private mirrored her movements, struggling at first, but gradually finding rhythm. Another recruit approached. I wanted to apologize for earlier," he said quietly, eyes downcast. "I didn't understand." Dana's expression softened. "Thank you," she said simply. "That acknowledgement means more than you know." Her tone carried no condescension, only calm recognition. By listening, by allowing the soldiers to speak, and then guiding them subtly, she was establishing authority, not through rank alone, but through respect earned in shared understanding. Colonel Raymond watched quietly, his mind turning over decades of ingrained habits. He had spent his career enforcing compliance, measuring endurance, and punishing perceived weakness. And yet, here was a private half his age, demonstrating leadership, compassion, and influence in ways he had rarely seen in his senior officers. The lesson was unmistakable. Leadership wasn't just about discipline. It was about seeing the invisible battles soldiers carried and allowing courage to guide their growth. Donna continued moving among the platoon, correcting stances, offering small pointers on breathing, pacing, and focus. She never shouted, never raised her voice. yet each gesture carried weight. Soldiers began mirroring her calm composure, their movements subtly adjusting, their demeanor shifting from anxious or arrogant to focused and respectful. Her influence, quiet yet undeniable, was transforming the platoon's culture in real time. Raymond approached her after the exercises, stopping a few feet away. The field was alive with movement, yet Dana remained composed, watching quietly. "Private Keller," he said, his tone steady, "you're changing more than just their performance. You're changing how they think, how they carry themselves, and how they respect one another. And you're teaching me something I've overlooked for decades." Donna's gaze met his, calm and unwavering. She did not need to speak, for the acknowledgement was mutual. Raymond exhaled, understanding that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned, demonstrated through courage and integrity, quietly and consistently. As the afternoon progressed, the dynamic among the soldiers continued to evolve. Older recruits who had once been dismissive now observed Donna carefully, adjusting their own routines to reflect her focus. Younger soldiers, inspired by her example, approached her for guidance. Donna remained patient, guiding them without judgment, reinforcing the lessons of endurance, control, and resilience. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the field. Dana paused, wiping sweat from her brow, breathing deeply, feeling the ache in her muscles and the burn in her lungs. Yet there was a sense of satisfaction, quiet and profound. She had not only endured, but she had influenced, inspired, and reshaped the perception of everyone present, including the colonel himself. Raymond observed silently from the sidelines, arms crossed, reflecting on the day. He had commanded hundreds of soldiers, enforced countless drills, and shaped numerous recruits into competent soldiers. But few lessons had hit him as hard as the one Dana Keller had imparted. Strength was not always visible. Leadership was not always forceful, and courage often manifested quietly, in ways impossible to quantify. As the platoon dispersed for the day, whispers of admiration followed Dana. Soldiers approached her, asking questions, seeking advice, or simply acknowledging her presence with a nod or a quiet smile. She accepted each interaction calmly, reinforcing her quiet authority without claiming recognition. Every exchange solidified her role, not just as a survivor, but as a mentor, a guide, and a living lesson in resilience. Raymond lingered a moment longer, watching her move across the field. He understood fully that the morning's events were not a singular moment, they were a turning point. Donna Keller had transformed the platoon's culture, reshaped perceptions of leadership, and reminded him of the human dimensions of command that could never be measured by drills alone. And in that sunlit, sweat-soaked afternoon at Fort Benning, one private had shown that courage, endurance, and leadership could emerge quietly, invisibly, yet leave an indelible mark on everyone fortunate enough to witness it. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the Fort Benning training grounds, turning the parade field into a furnace of sweat and dust. Soldiers shuffled in formation, muscles aching, hearts pounding, yet the energy was charged with a new awareness. For days, the memory of Dana Keller's revelation, the scar, the story, and her calm, unyielding presence had lingered in the ranks, transforming the platoon's dynamic. Today, however, the lesson would be tested under pressure. Colonel Raymond stood at the edge of the field, his eyes scanning the soldiers, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the quiet attention, the restrained competitiveness that now replaced ridicule. He had decided it was time to challenge the platoon in a way that would push their endurance, teamwork, and focus to the limits. The obstacle course, a grueling test of physical ability and coordination, was ready. It had humbled countless recruits over the years, but today it would serve as more than a physical trial. Dana approached the starting line, her uniform soaked with sweat, but her posture erect, movements deliberate. The younger soldiers glanced at her nervously. They knew her story, knew the strength she carried silently beneath the surface, and yet the looming challenge made nerves jittery. Dana didn't speak. She simply adjusted her laces, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. Her composure radiated confidence, calming those nearby. Raymond blew his whistle sharply, signaling the start. Soldiers surged forward onto the course, muscles straining, lungs burning. The obstacle course was merciless. Towering walls to climb, narrow beams to balance across, muddy pits to crawl through, and simulated combat zones requiring precision and teamwork. The recruits had trained for months, yet today's challenge would reveal more than stamina. It would reveal character, resilience, and the influence of leadership under pressure. Dana's strategy was subtle yet powerful. She moved at her own controlled pace, navigating each obstacle with precision, never rushing, never faltering. She encouraged the younger soldiers quietly, offering tips on balance, breathing, and timing, allowing them to find their rhythm rather than forcing her pace upon them. Every glance, every brief word of guidance reinforced her quiet authority. She wasn't the fastest, but she was steady, resilient, and unshakable, a living example of endurance and leadership under stress. The first wall approached a vertical structure coated in mud, impossible to scale without effort and coordination. Several soldiers struggled, slipping and falling, frustration evident in their strained faces. Dana stepped forward, observing the difficulty. Instead of rushing in, she demonstrated a slow, methodical technique, gripping handholds firmly, planting her feet deliberately, and pulling herself upward without panic. One by one, the younger recruits followed, mirroring her methodical approach. Colonel Raymond watched from the sidelines, a rare expression of awe crossing his face. He had seen countless soldiers tackle this obstacle, yet none approached it with Dana's calm authority. It wasn't just her skill, it was the confidence she inspired, the patience she instilled in others, and the quiet strength that carried everyone through. The course continued, each challenge more demanding than the last. The narrow balance beams threatened to topple even the most experienced recruits. Mud pits clung to boots, sapping energy. The simulated combat zone tested coordination under stress. Yet Dana moved deliberately, maintaining her rhythm while guiding others subtly. Soldiers who had mocked her before now leaned on her example, trusting her pace and judgment. She wasn't leading by rank. She was leading by resilience and quiet influence. Midway through the course, a younger recruit, a lanky private who had previously made fun of her, slipped in the mud pit, face down in the muck. Panic flashed in his eyes as he struggled to pull himself free. Dana was there instantly, extending a hand and calmly helping him regain his footing. "Focus on your breathing," she instructed quietly. "One step at a time. You've got this." Her calm, steady tone diffused his panic, allowing him to regain composure and continue. Raymond's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about authority or intimidation. It was about recognizing fear, responding with guidance, and instilling confidence. Dana Keller, a private, was embodying lessons he had spent decades trying to teach. And she was succeeding where he could not through orders, but through presence and resilience. A final obstacle loomed, a towering wall requiring teamwork to scale. Soldiers struggled individually, pulling themselves up only to slip back down. Dana stepped forward, assessing the situation. Instead of attempting it alone, she coordinated quietly, positioning herself to assist and guide her fellow soldiers. She encouraged them, lifted hands where needed, and demonstrated techniques that allowed the group to move collectively, overcoming the challenge not through brute force, but through cooperation and resilience. The entire platoon reached the top together, breathless, exhausted, but triumphant. The transformation was evident. Soldiers who had doubted, mocked, or ignored Dana now looked to her with admiration and respect. Her calm authority had reshaped the group, creating cohesion under pressure, reinforcing lessons of endurance, teamwork, and resilience that could not be taught through traditional drills alone. Raymond blew his whistle, signaling the end of the exercise. He approached Dana, who stood at the edge of the obstacle course, sweat-soaked but composed. He studied her carefully, seeing not just a private who had survived trauma, but a leader whose quiet influence had transformed the entire platoon. "Private Keller," he said, voice low but deliberate, "today you've done more than just complete the course. You've shown what leadership really is. You've taught endurance, patience, and courage, not through orders, but by example. You've earned respect that cannot be given. It can only be earned, and you've done it in full." Dana nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without pride. She had not sought recognition. She had simply acted as herself, resilient, calm, and focused, and in doing so, had guided the platoon through one of the most grueling challenges of their training. The soldiers gathered around her, breathing heavily, mud streaked across their faces and uniforms. They didn't speak at first, simply looking at her with a newfound understanding. One young recruit, barely 19, broke the silence. "Private Keller, thank you. I've never seen anything like that. You made me believe I could do it." Dana smiled faintly. "You already could," she said softly. "You just needed to see it in yourself." Raymond watched quietly, the lesson settling deeply. Authority and discipline were important, yes, but they were not enough. True leadership required seeing, understanding, and amplifying the courage within others. Dana Keller had demonstrated that powerfully, and today's exercise had made it undeniable to every soldier present. By the time the platoon dispersed, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, shadows stretching across the field. Exhausted but energized, the soldiers carried with them not just the fatigue of physical exertion, but a deeper understanding of resilience, leadership, and teamwork. Dana moved among them quietly, checking on the younger recruits, offering words of encouragement, guiding without demanding. Her presence continued to shape the group subtly, ensuring that lessons endured beyond the obstacle course. Raymond lingered, observing the transformation. He had spent decades commanding, instructing, and enforcing, yet rarely had he witnessed such profound influence from someone of lower rank. Dana Keller had reminded him that leadership was not only about authority, it was about perception, empathy, courage, and the quiet strength that could inspire others even in the most challenging circumstances. As the soldiers returned to their barracks, exhausted and mud-streaked, Dana paused for a moment, taking in the field. She was sore, her muscles screaming from exertion, yet her mind was calm. She had faced judgment, led quietly by example, and emerged not just unbroken, but influential, shaping the platoon in ways that would endure long after the sun set. Colonel Raymond exhaled, silently acknowledging the private who had redefined courage, leadership, and respect in a single afternoon. The ripple effect of her actions would resonate for weeks, months, perhaps years, a lesson far deeper than any drill, lecture, or punishment could ever teach. And in that sunlit, sweat-soaked afternoon, one private had proven that resilience, courage, and leadership could emerge quietly, invisibly, yet leave an indelible mark on everyone fortunate enough to witness it. The sun had begun its slow descent over Fort Benning, casting long shadows across the parade field. A gentle breeze rustled the dry grass, carrying the lingering scent of sweat, mud, and determination. The platoon gathered for one final assembly of the day, exhausted, mud-streaked, yet transformed. Today's obstacle course and the lessons surrounding Dana Keller's quiet resilience had altered more than just their physical stamina, had shifted their understanding of courage, leadership, and mutual respect. Donna stood at the edge of the formation, shoulders squared, gaze steady. Her uniform bore the marks of exertion, her hair damp and plastered to her neck, but her posture radiated calm authority. She had endured judgment, ridicule, and every challenge thrown her way, and she had emerged not just unbroken, but influential, shaping the mindset of everyone present. Colonel Raymond approached the platoon, his expression solemn yet filled with a rare vulnerability. Decades of commanding soldiers had instilled discipline, control, and authority in him. But today, he carried a different lesson, a lesson of perception, humility, and the recognition of courage in forms that were often invisible. He cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the hushed murmurs of the soldiers. "Today," he began, voice steady, "we've witnessed something extraordinary. Not just in terms of physical endurance or drills, but in the essence of courage itself. Private Keller has reminded us all that strength isn't measured by numbers, by speed, or by obedience. Strength is measured by resilience, by the courage to face what most would hide from, and by the ability to inspire others quietly through your actions." The platoon remained silent, each soldier absorbing the words, realizing the gravity of what had unfolded. Some glanced at Dana with newfound awe. Others reflected inwardly, considering their own limitations and the ways they had misjudged her or each other. Dana nodded subtly, acknowledging the colonel's words without fanfare. She did not need praise. She had learned long ago that her value was not defined by external validation, but she understood the significance of this moment. For the first time, her endurance, her survival, and her quiet strength had reshaped the perception of the people around her, including the man who had once mocked her. Raymond continued, his voice taking on a firmer, reflective tone. "Leadership is not about orders alone. It is not about fear or intimidation. It is about recognizing the battles that others carry silently, about guiding them, supporting them, and amplifying their courage. Today, this platoon has learned more than any drill or lecture could teach. And we have learned it from one of our own private Dana Keller." Whispers of admiration rippled through the soldiers, some murmuring, some nodding, all carrying the weight of acknowledgement. Those who had doubted her now looked at her differently, understanding that leadership and resilience could manifest in quiet, powerful ways. Dana had become more than a soldier. She had become a living lesson in courage, endurance, and influence. A young recruit stepped forward tentatively, his eyes wide. "Private Keller, I just thank you. I've never seen anyone handle everything you've faced and still guide us through the course. Still stay calm under pressure." Dana met his gaze, voice calm, steady. "You don't need to thank me. You had the ability all along. I just reminded you to trust it and to trust yourself." Her words were simple, yet carried a profound weight. They reinforced the quiet power of her leadership. She did not demand admiration, but she inspired it. Raymond observed silently, noting the transformation not only among the younger recruits, but across the entire platoon. The older, more experienced soldiers who had previously been dismissive now mirrored her composure, their interactions shaped subtly by her example. The ripple effect of her influence extended beyond the immediate tasks. It had reshaped culture, perception, and the very fabric of the platoon. As the assembly drew to a close, Raymond motioned for silence. "Let this day be remembered," he said, voice firm yet reflective, as a lesson in what true strength and leadership look like. Let us carry forward the understanding that courage is not always loud, nor visible, nor demanded. Sometimes it is quietly demonstrated, but it leaves a mark deeper than any drill, any order, or any punishment ever could. He paused, letting the words settle, and then added, softer, almost to himself, "And sometimes the ones we least expect to teach us are the ones who leave the biggest impact." Dana stood quietly, absorbing the moment. She felt a mixture of fatigue, relief, and quiet satisfaction. She had survived ridicule, endured judgment, and faced challenges that tested her body and spirit. And through it all, she had influenced, inspired, and reshaped the minds of those around her. Today was not about personal triumph. It was about legacy, about demonstrating that resilience, courage, and quiet leadership could create profound change. The platoon began to disperse, soldiers moving toward the barracks, some offering nods or quiet words of gratitude to Dana as they passed. The respect she had earned was evident in every glance, every gesture, every subtle acknowledgement. She had transformed the morning, the afternoon, and now the evening, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. Raymond remained behind, watching Dinah walk away, sweat-soaked and exhausted, yet carrying herself with unwavering composure. He reflected on the decades of leadership he had exercised, the countless soldiers he had trained, the lessons he had tried to instill. And he realized, fully and profoundly, that Donna Keller had taught him one of the most important lessons of his career, that true strength is invisible until revealed, that leadership is not about commanding, but about recognizing and amplifying the courage of others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, the parade field seemed transformed, not just by mud, sweat, and exertion, but by the intangible force of courage, resilience, and quiet authority that Dana had demonstrated. The scars she carried, once a source of fear, embarrassment, or judgment, had become a symbol of strength, endurance, and inspiration. For the soldiers, the memory of today would linger, guiding their actions, shaping their understanding of courage, and altering the way they perceived strength and leadership. For Raymond, it would serve as a lifelong reminder that authority was not enough. Understanding, perception, and respect were equally, if not more, powerful. Donna paused for a moment, looking back at the field, at the recruits dispersing, at the colonel standing silently. She allowed herself a brief smile, the weight of the day settling into quiet satisfaction. She had faced every challenge, survived judgment, and influenced a platoon, a formation, and a commanding officer through nothing more than presence, resilience, and quiet guidance. And in that moment, she understood something deeply. True strength was not in the scars themselves, but in the courage to reveal them, the perseverance to endure, and the willingness to lead without demanding recognition. She had earned respect, not through words, but through action, endurance, and unwavering integrity. As the field emptied and the shadows lengthened, Colonel Raymond finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Private Keller," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you. Today, you've reminded all of us what it means to be strong, to lead, and to endure. You've taught lessons that I and this platoon will carry with us forever." Dana nodded slightly, her eyes calm, steady. "Thank you, sir," she replied simply. Her tone carried no pride, only acknowledgement and quiet resolve. She had survived, she had endured, and she had transformed those around her. As the sun set completely over Fort Benning, the day came to a close, leaving behind a lasting testament to resilience, leadership, and the quiet power of courage revealed. Dana Keller, scarred but unbowed, had not only survived. She had inspired, guided, and reshaped the understanding of strength for everyone who had witnessed her journey. And in doing so, she had left a legacy that would endure far beyond the boundaries of the parade field, living on in the hearts and minds of those who had learned the true meaning of courage. The colonel watched her walk away one last time, a rare smile crossing his face. For the first time in decades, he truly understood that leadership was not about power or authority. It was about recognizing strength where it quietly lived, nurturing it, and allowing it to shine, even when hidden beneath scars. And in that quiet, sunlit evening, the lesson was complete. resilience, courage, and quiet leadership could emerge anywhere, leave an indelible mark, and transform not just a platoon, but the very soul of those fortunate enough to witness it.